Stephen writes, the Liberals have two tasks to succeed during the next election. First, to form the official opposition rather than have the NDP fill that role. Second, to put the Conservatives in a minority government position rather than a majority. Chrystia Freeland would not be the right choice. She has been brilliant in her government roles but lacks warmth and charisma. If her great intellect and drive were combined with the warmth and charisma of Bonnie Henry, head of the public health in BC during COVID, then it would work, but isn't the case. Mark Carney would be the most successful in the coming election, but would he want to serve as leader of the opposition for years and years? Just some thoughts from Stephen in Nelson. Frank writes, well, I hope nothing horrible happens during prorogation. I suspect a lot of Canadians will get out of Dodge, so to speak. Good time for Trump to make Canada the 51st state. Okay, Frank, a little tongue-in-cheek there. Thank you so much for your emails. It's 12:34 now. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott, and we are taking your calls on Justin Trudeau announcing this morning that he would step down and resign as Liberal leader, and he'll stay on until a successor is chosen. And Parliament is prorogued until March 24th. That does give the Liberal Party more than 2 months to choose a new leader before the possibility of another federal election. Now, this all comes after weeks of pressure from within his own party to step down. And MPs say they were worried about the Liberal Party's chances in an election with him as leader. Now, we are taking your calls. What is your reaction? What does this mean for an election? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And BC political leaders have been responding today as well. Premier David Eby sent out a statement that says, in part, while we didn't always agree, I want to thank Justin Trudeau for serving as Prime Minister during some very difficult times our country has faced. Today, we face new challenges and serious threats. Regardless of who is the next Prime Minister, we must come together as Canadians to protect workers and businesses against devastating tariffs. Those that reference to incoming President-elect Donald Trump and his tariff threat of 25% on Canadian goods. BC Conservative leader John Rustad wrote, the resignation and prorogation of Parliament mark a pivotal moment for British Columbia and all Canadians. It's clear that Canadians are rejecting divisive, ideological leadership and are demanding a return to common sense government. Okay, taking more of your calls. Our numbers again are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And joining me with more reaction from on the ground in British Columbia is CBC's provincial affairs reporter, Katie DeRosa. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this big day. Can you tell us more about those statements from David Eby and John Rustad? What does Trudeau's resignation mean for BC?
Well, interestingly, unlike other premiers, David Eby did not take questions from reporters today. He issued a statement. And as you noted, he highlighted some of the common ground that he and Trudeau had, such as affordable childcare, but he also said they disagreed on issues. And I would say that's an understatement. Premier David Eby has spent the last 2 years of his leadership slamming Trudeau for forgetting about BC, leaving it behind on issues like immigration and economic development. And he accused Trudeau of favoring vote-rich Ontario and Quebec and showering them with cash is a phrase he used. So, I think the statement kind of glosses over that. John Rustad also said that Eby and Trudeau are aligned on many issues, and Rustad said that Eby has lost his closest ally in Ottawa. And Rustad accused Eby of no longer having someone to point the finger at to blame for BC's issues, accusing Eby of blaming Ottawa for its problems on decriminalization, public safety, and other big issues like also the carbon tax. So a bit of infighting between Rustad and Eby over Trudeau's resignation and what it means for BC.
It's like who can distance themselves the most, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Now, let's go through some BC names. CBC has learned from a source that Jonathan Wilkinson, the Natural Resources Minister and a North Vancouver MP, is organizing a leadership bid. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so sources are also saying that Christy Clark is also considering a leadership bid. Jonathan Wilkinson's name has come up as well. Christy Clark has not confirmed that, and neither has Jonathan Wilkinson, but both of them are said to have teams organizing in the background and are really just trying to sort out their timing. Of course, Christy Clark has the benefit of leading a major political party in BC, being the premier, and a bit of an outsider status, which gives her some distance from the Liberal government, which is unpopular right now. So, she has that in her pocket, and certainly some British Columbians we spoke to today said they like Christy Clark and they would like to see her as leader. Jonathan Wilkinson is, of course, the energy minister. He has previously been the CEO of a renewable energy company, but I would argue he doesn't have as much name recognition in BC as Christy Clark. So definitely some BC names coming up, but we'll have to see if they have success.
We talked about that level of success, but pretty much nil, I think, from BC with our previous guest. But what has been the sort of rate of success here for British Columbians wanting to rise to the federal leadership levels?
Right. The federal Liberals have never had a leader from BC, and there's only been one prime minister from BC, and that was Kim Campbell. That was very short-lived. So not a lot of success because, again, of the amount of votes in Ontario and Quebec. We are told that Christy Clark is learning French to beef up her dual language chops, and, her statement on Twitter was bilingual. So clearly she's trying to, put to test her French abilities. But, again, certainly BC politicians haven't had great success. But again, I think there's many issues that BC wants to get on the table, such as the border issues. So at least to have BC represented on that stage, I think would be good.
Interesting too. Yes, Christy Clark's statement on Twitter, both in English and French, and part of it says that as a lifelong Liberal, I look forward to joining tens of thousands of Canadians to choose our next leader. This is the biggest opportunity in over a decade that we've had to grow our party and welcome new Liberals, including Canadians concerned about the future of our country. Let's seize it. And I saw some replies to that tweet saying, "What, Christy Clark, seizing the opportunity to go for a Liberal leadership." So some of the conversation on Twitter, on X this morning. Katie DeRosa is with me, CBC's provincial affairs reporter here in BC. I'm taking your calls here on BC Today. Your reaction to Justin Trudeau resigning as Liberal leader. Parliament will be prorogued until March 24th. Rob is our next caller now in Vernon. Hi, Rob. Go ahead. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, hi. So I want to lay my cards on the table. I'm a member of the Liberal Party of Canada. I'm a strong Liberal, and I have been campaign manager in two elections previously. I live in a very conservative area, and I think it was inevitable that Mr. Trudeau was going to have to resign just because the accumulation of negative rhetoric that has been thrust out there by the Conservative Party. I kind of wish Mr. Trudeau had resigned about a year ago so that a leadership, a proper leadership conference could have been held, convention held, and a leader put in place to carve out their own particular policy. I'm very, very concerned about Pierre Poilievre. Mr. Poilievre engages in vindictive and classless rhetoric, much of which is dis and misinformation. And
can I just get you to be specific when you say that? What are you referring to?
Well, today, for example, he said in a I think it's a video of some sort that the Conservatives typically use, is that the Liberal Party hated Mr. Trudeau. That's totally incorrect. The Liberal Party doesn't hate Mr. Trudeau, but that's Mr. Poilievre's language. And it's very typical of what we're seeing in the United States that Donald Trump uses. And I don't think that Mr. Poilievre, to use one of your guests' phrases, has the chops to be the Prime Minister of Canada. I think that Mr. Trudeau was misunderstood in many ways. His education was the subject of a lot of misinformation. His commitment to Canada was the subject of a lot of misinformation. And, it just seems like whoever gets the last word, divisive word in Mr. Poilievre's case, kind of gets the attention.
So, Rob, it's so interesting to hear from you. You know, as a former campaign manager, then what do you want to see from a new leader from the Liberal Party heading into the next election? How would you advise them in a campaign?
Well, I would advise them to come out with a solid policy program. There's a lot of the policies of the federal Liberals that a lot of people don't like. But, you take the carbon tax policy, for example. You won't find an economist in Canada that won't tell you that the carbon tax isn't the fairest way to tax polluters. And yet the public, broadly speaking, is totally opposed to the carbon tax. And they don't seem to understand the facts and the reasoning behind the carbon tax. So Mr. Trudeau, of course, was vilified, and Mr. Poilievre clearly doesn't understand the logic behind the carbon tax. And he spouts a lot of rhetoric that just doesn't make any sense. So, I think a leader like Mr. Carney and your previous guest, the political science prof. I also have a degree in political science, but I think that when he says he's not sure Mr. Carney has the chops, what that tells me is he doesn't know Mr. Carney. Mr. Carney is an amazing individual and would be by
I think he said in Parliament as a parliamentarian.
Oh, you haven't seen him in Parliament. How can he make a judgment when he hasn't seen him in Parliament? So what I'm saying is that sure, the Liberals have been in for 10 years, and it's not uncommon, after a 10-year session that people get tired of the people that are there, and that's been the history of politics in Canada. But in the past, like I'm old enough to remember that if the Liberals lost and the Mulroney Conservatives walked in, I would be okay because I knew that Brian Mulroney would always do the right thing. But under the current leadership of the Conservative Party, I don't believe that's the case anymore. So, yeah. We'll have to see what happens, and Canadians will decide.
They absolutely will. And Rob, you just echoed what another caller said earlier. We will see what happens next. Thank you so much for your call. Good to hear from you and your perspective. Thank you so much. Gordon is next in Vancouver. Hi, Gordon. Hi, Gordon. Are you there? Okay, let's try Ben. Hi, Ben. Are you there?
I don't know whether you're speaking into my line or not.
Okay, and my apologies. Who's speaking right now?
Oh, I'm DLJ.
DLJ. Hi, DLJ. Thanks so much for calling in. And what do you want to say about Justin Trudeau?
Oh, thank you very much for taking my call. I am just so relieved. I am so relieved. I haven't been this relieved since 2015. I'm an NDP supporter, and back in 2015, we had a candidate for the PM's job, Thomas Mulcair. He was so articulate, and when he was asked the question, he would not only answer it, but it would be like an educational experience to listen to his just so inarticulate that it's embarrassing. So as far as a successor is concerned, I ask myself, where is Jane Philpott when you need her? She would be somebody amazing. I know she has a bright new job, but she was also somebody easy to listen to.
Okay. So the kind of rhetorical skills that you're looking for.
Yeah, I felt embarrassed as a Canadian. It just didn't seem to be. I mean, he a lot of people found him handsome, but that didn't do it for me. I want somebody who can represent us more adeptly, and I'm relieved.
DLJ, thank you so much for your call. That's DLJ in Vancouver. And let's, as we wait for the next caller on the line, I'll put out the phone numbers again in our last 12 minutes of the program here. 1-800-825-5950 if you want to share your reaction to Justin Trudeau announcing he is resigning as leader of the Liberal Party after much pressure from within the party from a number of MPs and, of course, polling numbers showing a very low likelihood of winning the next election. What do you think? What are your thoughts on his resignation announced today? Parliament will be prorogued until March 24th, and that gives the Liberals some time, about 2 months, to find a new leader heading into the next election. We've heard from opposition parties already saying no matter who the leader is going to be, of the Liberals, they were ministers. They were people who supported the policies of Justin Trudeau. So love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. I think we do have Gordon in Vancouver now. Hi, Gordon.
Yes, hello.
Hello there, and great to have you. What are your thoughts? What's your reaction?
Well, I'd like to commend you on and your guest speaker, the professor from UBC, on being critical of the Liberal government, and yourself. You very deftly handled your callers and taking them to task on statements that they make. Obviously, it's been very emotional. The callers coming in, there's a lot of emotion driven in this current times. I was a conservative, and I was convinced by my children in 2015 to vote Liberal, which I did, because the Harper government was long in the tooth. They became complacent, and Harper was probably not the best person to be in the party. He should have stepped aside and let somebody new and young reinvigorate the party. But if we look back at those times, in BC we had the fast ferries, problem, fiasco, and the government spending issues. I think there was something about a $5,000 or $7,000 hammer being purchased.
Right, in provincial politics.
Yes, yes. But federally, we were looking at the Conservatives and saying, they're just not doing what needs. It's time for a change, and I think that's indicative of today. There is time for a change, and what we've been doing hasn't worked, so we need to change it up. I find that a lot of people that you speak with and then callers that come in are very negative towards the Conservatives when we've always only been a two-party, country in Canada. So it's time to give them a chance and try and right this train that we're on. And
Gordon, what do you make of, a lot of the criticism of the Conservatives would be criticism of Pierre Poilievre for, relying on slogans essentially, and saying things that are would be perceived as divisive, for example. So what are your thoughts on him personally as a leader?
I've had a chance to meet with him and speak with him, and I would like us to remember that this divisive and negative type of campaigning first came about in 2015 when the Liberals were, the Stop Harper, stop signs, the sloganing was actually it's a Liberal technique that was first brought on. So he is only playing the game that has been dealt to him. And the problem is he plays it better. I mean, he's articulate, he's educated, he's fast on his feet, he has a lot of qualities where he sticks to what he says. He's not duplicitous, and he's not talking out of both sides of his mouth,
Really good to hear from you, Gordon. Thanks so much for the call.
Thank you for taking our calls.
Take care. That's Gordon in Vancouver. Let's take one more call before I go back to Katie DeRosa. And William is actually calling us from south of the border at Port Townsend. Hi, William.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, I'm curious to hear what you have to say watching from south of the border.
Well, I lived in Canada for years, and I follow Canadian news closely. My son is a Canadian, lives in Vancouver, and I agree with him. He says the reason that did Trudeau in was the post COVID inflation anti-incumbency wave that impacted pretty much all the world, impacted Canada too. At least a year ago, it was clear he should step aside and let someone else carry the baton. I would like to see Chrystia Freeland get in office because he would be no friend of Donald Trump's, and I like that a lot.
William, thank you. I understand you're a former newspaper columnist as well.
I was a newspaper columnist in Montreal for the Gazette.
Oh, wow. Well, great to hear from you. Thanks so much for the call. Interesting point you raise about the challenges that incumbent governments have had around the world that we've seen as well. So that's interesting to throw into the discussion there. That's William joining us from Port Townsend in the United States. Well, let's just hear from one of the MPs who had been calling publicly for Justin Trudeau to resign. Ken Hardy is a Port Kells MP in Surrey.
Well, it had the sense of inevitability about it because, it's been like background radiation. It's been growing and growing and growing for actually a number of years. And, if you were to look inside the heart and soul of individual Liberal MPs, there'd be a bit of sadness, a lot of regret. But again, this is inevitable. One way or the other, this was going to happen. And it looks like maybe today's the day.
Why regret?
Well, a number of different things. I think that, and I can only speak for myself personally because I don't canvass the other members on their specific feelings. But I know personally over the number of years, I've seen opportunities missed, disconnects happening. You get inside that big echo chamber in Ottawa, in the Prime Minister's office and all of the people around them. They can get awfully detached from the sentiments of everyday Canadians at street level. The government has done a lot of things, and in fact, government is still working. I have to mention that right off the top, regardless of what's happening with Leader. Ministers are out doing their job. We're looking at the Trump administration and what we need to do about that, and Ministers LeBlanc and Jolly are quite engaged there. But I could see things that weren't happening as well as they should have, or things that we missed doing. And I think that those are probably the nature of the disconnect that I was talking about. Things that people on the street were looking for government to do that maybe we weren't doing, although we were doing a lot of other things that were really good.
That's Ken Hardy, BC MP for the Liberals, having been calling for Justin Trudeau to resign. I should add that he was speaking this morning on the early edition as news came out that Trudeau would be making an announcement. So this was prior to the announcement outside Rideau Cottage. Let me wrap up with Katie DeRosa, BC Provincial Affairs reporter for CBC. We've heard what kind of an assessment there from Ken Hardy on how the government did, where the misses were, what he felt was a success. We've heard from, callers saying that this was, what their thoughts are in terms of what Trudeau did or didn't do. What do you see as the mood among the BC electorate? Here we are, having just come through our own election, a provincial election a few months ago. What's your sense of the mood among the electorate here in BC, Katie?
Well, I think what the BC election told us is we're kind of seeing a hollowing out of the center to some extent. People are solidly in either a more to the left progressive or perhaps more of a conservative camp. And we saw that through the collapse of BC United, the former BC Liberal Party, which again has no affiliation to the federal Liberals, but that was the party Christy Clark once led. So I think that's going to be difficult for potential BC politicians to sort of try and straddle this middle ground and try and deliver a strong message when we are seeing increased polarization in our politics. So I think that could be an uphill battle, but certainly the economy seems to be the big issue that everyone is looking for answers on: inflation, cost of living. So I expect those to be the big issues, and whether or not Christy Clark or Jonathan Wilkinson confirm today will have to be determined, but certainly the leadership race is going to be very interesting.
It will be. We've heard from a few callers now saying we will see what happens. It will be up to, I guess, for the Liberals, it will be up to them to choose their leader and then up to Canadians. Lots to watch. I know you're making a lot of calls, Katie, so thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
We'll watch to see what responses you get as well. That's Katie DeRosa, CBC's Provincial Affairs reporter in BC. And many, many more emails here. Jacqueline writes from Ladysmith regarding the two-party system. Comment from Gordon. We're a four-party system withheld from true representation by the first-past-the-post electoral system. Thank you for that email. Jojo writes on Mark Carney, when do you think the last time was when he had peas on toast for dinner? How can he possibly relate to ordinary working people? And Suzanne writes, the caller who said the slogans are something the Liberals started in 2015. Have you forgotten? He's just not ready. Great hair, though. Thanks for your emails.